My perfect sister stole my life to buy a house she couldn't afford, and my parents expect me to pay the mortgage. I didn't plan to talk about this, but what happened next completely changed how I saw everything. At first, it felt normal, almost harmless, but the more I looked back, the more the small details started to connect. And that's when I realized this wasn't just another story. I was sitting in my cubicle at the marketing firm where I'd worked for 4 years when the call came that changed everything. It wasn't a call from my mother, who usually phoned to tell me how wonderful my older sister Elena was doing. It was a call from a collections agency in a state I hadn't visited in half a decade. The man on the other end was polite but firm, asking me when I planned to settle the 3 months of arrears on a luxury SUV I had apparently purchased in suburban Illinois. I live in a tiny studio apartment in Seattle and take the light rail to work every morning. I don't own a car, let alone a $60,000 German import. I laughed at first, telling him he had the wrong person, but then he read back my social security number, my date of birth, and an old address I'd used during my freshman year of college. The laughter died in my throat, replaced by a cold, leaden weight that settled in the pit of my stomach. I spent the next 4 hours on the phone with my bank, the credit bureaus, and the local police. The damage was catastrophic. Someone had been living as Claire Vance for the better part of 2 years. There were credit cards, utility bills, and most shockingly, a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house in my hometown. My credit score, which I had meticulously guarded like a holy relic so I could eventually buy my own place, had plummeted from a 790 to a 415. I was financially radioactive. The realization of the theft was a trauma, but the realization of the thief was a betrayal that felt like a physical blow. The verified phone number on the fraudulent mortgage application wasn't mine. It was my mother's home phone. I didn't call the police to report my mother. Not yet. I drove 5 hours across the state line to the house listed on the mortgage, the house I supposedly owned. It was a beautiful brick-fronted colonial in a neighborhood I could never afford. Parked in the driveway was the silver SUV from the collections call. I sat in my beat-up sedan across the street watching the front door. I waited for an hour, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, until the door finally opened. I expected a stranger. I expected a professional identity thief. Instead, out walked my sister, Elena, carrying a designer bag and wearing a coat that cost more than my monthly rent. She looked happy. She looked perfect, just like my parents always said she was. She was followed by my mother, who was carrying a tray of lemonade like they were celebrating a hard day of work. They weren't just living in a house stolen in my name, they were playing house with my future as the fuel. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. When my mother saw me, she didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that I had arrived without calling first. Elena, however, froze. The lemonade pitcher in my mother's hand rattled against the glass. I walked up the driveway, past the car I was apparently paying for, and stood in front of them. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just held up my phone, showing the screen of the credit monitoring app with the red critical alerts flashing like a siren. I asked one question: how long? Elena's face went through a dozen different emotions before settling on a mask of indignant entitlement. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She looked at me and said, "You weren't using your credit, Claire. You're a minimalist. You live in a box in the city. I needed a yard for the kids. I needed a fresh start after the divorce. Mom said you wouldn't mind helping family." My mother stepped forward then, not to hug me, but to shield Elena. She told me to keep my voice down so the neighbors wouldn't hear. She said that Elena had been through so much and that since I was the successful one with the stable life, it was only fair that I shared my creditworthiness. They had forged my signature on 20 different documents, used my identity to bypass Elena's bankruptcy, and now that the perfect plan was failing because they couldn't keep up with the payments, they expected me to just start paying the bills to save the family reputation. I looked at the house, the car, and the 2 women who had literally erased my identity to build a lie. My mother had the audacity to tell me that if I reported the fraud, I would be the one destroying the family. She said she would never forgive me if I sent her eldest daughter to prison. They thought they had me trapped because family is supposed to endure anything. They thought that because I was the quiet one, the responsible one, I would just shoulder the debt and disappear back into my small life. They didn't realize that when you steal someone's name, you take away their reason to be nice. I walked back to my car without saying another word, ignoring their shouts. I had 60 days to figure out how to untangle this without ending up in a shelter myself. The paper daughter was done being a placeholder for their mistakes. The audit of our lives was just beginning, and I was going to make sure every cent was accounted for, no matter who had to pay the price. I spent that night in a roadside motel 20 miles away from the brick colonial that bore my name. The room smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and ancient cigarette smoke, a far cry from the high thread count sheets Elena was likely sleeping on at my expense. I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open, the blue light reflecting off the stacks of police reports and bank statements I had printed at a local library. My mind was a frantic calculator. The mortgage was $400,000. The car was $60,000. The credit cards, mostly used for high-end furniture and lifestyle purchases to fill that hollow house, totaled another $30,000. They hadn't just dipped into my credit credit. They had hollowed me out and filled the void with debt. The next morning, I returned to the house. I didn't go in with a head full of steam this time. I went in with a recorder in my pocket and a demand for a meeting. My mother met me at the door, her face a mask of disappointment. She treated me like I was the one who had committed a transgression by showing up to claim my own life. Elena is sleeping, Claire. She had a migraine last night from all the stress you caused. Can't this wait? The bank isn't waiting, Mom, I said, pushing past her into the foyer. The house was beautiful, light-filled, with oak floors and custom crown molding. It was exactly the kind of home I had dreamed of one day earning. Seeing it now felt like looking at a crime scene. I've spent the last 12 hours talking to fraud investigators. I have a choice to make. I either file the police report naming Elena as the perpetrator, or I find a way to transfer all of this out of my name by Monday. My mother followed me into the kitchen, where she began to make coffee as if this were a normal Saturday visit. Transfer it? You know Elena can't qualify for a loan. That's why we had to do this in the first place. Her credit was ruined by that deadbeat husband of hers. We were just using yours as a bridge until she gets back on her feet. Why are you being so dramatic? A bridge? I shouted, the calm I had practiced in the car evaporating. Mom, she forged my signature on a federal mortgage document. That's not a bridge, that's a felony. And she's not paying the bridge toll. The SUV is 3 months behind. The mortgage is in the grace period. My credit score is destroyed. I can't even rent a new apartment if I wanted to move because I won't pass a background check. Elena walked in then, wearing a silk robe and holding a designer coffee mug. She looked at me with a cold, detached pity. You always were the selfish one, Claire. Even as a kid, you wouldn't share your toys. Now you're begrudging your nieces a stable home because of some numbers on a computer screen. It's just credit. It's not real money. It's very real when the sheriff shows up to seize the car, Elena, I snapped. I'm giving you 48 hours. I want a list of every account you opened in my name. I want every login, every password, and every physical card you have in your possession. Then we are going to the bank and you are going to tell them that you erroneously used my information. We will find a way to refinance this into Mom's name, or the house goes on the market. Elena laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Refinance? Mom's house is already tapped out. How do you think I paid the down payment on this place? Mom took out a second mortgage on the family home to give me the cash. We're all in this together now, Claire. If I go down, Mom goes down. Do you really want to be the reason your own mother is homeless at 65? The room went silent. I looked at my mother, who wouldn't meet my eye. The betrayal wasn't just a single act of theft. It was a web. They had used my credit to buy the house and my mother's equity to fund the entry. They had tied our fates together like passengers on a sinking ship, betting that I wouldn't be brave enough to cut the rope. My mother had gambled her own security to satisfy Elena's vanity, and she had used my future as the collateral. You did what? I whispered to my mother. You risked the house Dad worked his whole life for? For this? I gestured to the marble countertops and the stainless steel appliances. She needed help, Claire. My mother burst out, finally showing a flash of the anger she usually reserved for my perceived failures. You've always been fine. You're the stable one. You don't need help. Elena was drowning. What was I supposed to do? Let her live in a trailer park? Let my grandkids go to a failing school? So you stole my life instead, I said. You took the one thing I worked for, my reputation, and you gave it to her. And now you're telling me I have to keep paying for it because you're both too incompetent to manage the money you stole. We're not asking you to pay, Elena said, though the lie tasted like ash. We just need more time. I have a lead on a new job in pharmaceutical sales. In 6 months, I'll be making enough to catch up. You just need to be the paper daughter for a little longer. Just keep the collectors at bay. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you'll pay the arrears. No, I said, standing up. I felt a strange cold clarity. They weren't sorry. They weren't scared. They were just waiting for me to comply, the way I always had. They thought my sense of family duty was a cage. I'm not paying a cent, and I'm not waiting 6 months. I'm going back to that motel, and I'm making a list. I'm going to contact every single person you owe money to. I'm going to tell them exactly who is living in this house. And then I'm going to do something you clearly forgot I could do. And what's that? Elena asked, crossing her arms. I'm going to take my name back, I said. And since my name is the only thing keeping the roof over your head and the tires on that car, you might want to start packing. Because by Monday, Claire Vance is going to stop existing for you. I walked out, the sound of my mother sobbing following me down the driveway. They thought they had trapped me in a shared ruin, but they had forgotten one fundamental truth about identity theft. The person whose name is on the paper is the only one the world recognizes as the owner. Elena wanted to be me. Fine. She could deal with the version of me that was about to burn her fake world to the ground. I spent the next 48 hours in that motel room, turning it into a command center. I had bought a cheap printer and a carton of paper, and the walls were soon covered in a social audit. I wasn't just looking at bank statements anymore. I was looking at Elena's social media. She had blocked me months ago, but with a new burner account, I could see the life she was leading in my name. It was a curated nightmare. There were photos of Claire Vance donating to local school auctions. There were posts about my new business venture, an interior design consultancy that had apparently taken out a $10,000 small business loan. She had been using my name to build a brand of the charitable, successful local daughter, a stark contrast to the real me, who was currently eating canned soup over a pile of debt notices. Elena wasn't just stealing my credit, she was stealing my character. She was out in the community being the good daughter, while my mother whispered to the rest of the family that I had become reclusive and difficult in the city. The first blow of the social audit came on Monday morning. I didn't go back to the house. I went to the local bank branch where the mortgage was held. I had my birth certificate, my passport, and a thick file of evidence. I sat down with a branch manager named Mr. Miller. "I am Claire Vance," I said, sliding my ID across the desk. "And I am here to report that the person currently occupying the property at 422 Maple Drive is an imposter. My sister Elena has been using my identity to secure this loan." Mr. Miller's face went through a fascinating transformation. He knew Claire. He had probably had coffee with Claire when she signed the papers. He looked at my ID, then at me, the real Claire, tired, dressed in old jeans, and looking nothing like the polished woman who had walked into his office a year ago. "Ms. Vance, this is a very serious allegation," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "We have signatures. We have a verified employment history." "You have a faked employment history," I corrected him. "You have pay stubs from a company that doesn't exist, which was registered in my name using my mother's address. If you check the IP addresses for the digital signatures, you'll find they all originated from my mother's home. I was in Seattle on the day this mortgage was closed. I have the flight logs and the clock-in records from my actual job to prove it." As I spoke, I watched the reality set in. The bank wasn't just a victim. They were liable for not doing their due diligence. If I sued or if this went to the federal regulators, Mr. Miller's career was over. I wasn't there to destroy him, though. I was there to give him an out. "I'm not filing a police report today," I lied, keeping my voice steady. "But I am filing an identity theft affidavit with the FTC. I want this loan flagged. I want the accounts frozen. And I want the bank to begin the process of a voluntary surrender based on fraud. If you help me untangle this quietly, I won't name the bank in the civil suit I'm preparing against the other parties." It was a bluff. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but it worked. By noon, the Claire Vance accounts at that branch were locked. The designer lifestyle was officially cut off from its lifeblood. The fallout was immediate. As I walked out of the bank, my phone began to vibrate so hard I thought it would shatter. It was my mother. I ignored it. Then it was my Aunt Sarah. Then my cousin Marcus. The family group chat was a digital wildfire. "Claire, how could you freeze Elena's accounts? She's at the grocery store and her card was declined. The kids are crying. Mom says you're trying to put Elena on the street. Have you no heart? We thought you were the successful one, Claire. Why are you being so petty over a few bank errors?" They had all been fed the same story. Elena was the hero and I was the jealous, distant sibling trying to ruin her hard-earned life. I didn't reply to the messages. Instead, I drove to my mother's house. I knew Elena would be there, hiding behind my mother's skirts. When I pulled into the driveway, Aunt Sarah's car was already there. They were staging an intervention. I walked into the living room, and it was like walking into a courtroom where I had already been found guilty. Aunt Sarah stood up, her arms crossed. "Claire, sit down. We need to talk about your behavior. Your mother is a wreck. Elena is terrified. You can't just go around closing people's bank accounts because you're having a bad week." "It's not people's bank accounts, Aunt Sarah," I said, standing in the center of the room. "It's my bank account. Elena has been living as me for 2 years. She's spent nearly $100,000 of money that doesn't exist, using a name she didn't earn. Did she tell you that?" "She said you gave her permission," Aunt Sarah snapped. "She said you were partners in this house project." I looked at Elena, who was huddled on the sofa, looking small and victimized. "Is that what you told them, Elena? That I gave you permission to destroy my credit score? That I gave you permission to forge my name on a $400,000 debt?" You're misremembering, Claire," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with a fake sob. "We talked about it at Christmas 2 years ago. You said you wanted to help. You said you'd do anything for the kids. The gaslighting was so bold it almost made me admire her. Almost. I wasn't at Christmas 2 years ago, Elena," I said, pulling a folded paper from my pocket. "I was working the holiday shift in Seattle to pay off my student loans. Here is my time card. Here is the photo I sent Mom of my frozen dinner that night. You're lying. You've been lying to everyone in this room for years." I turned to my mother. "And you knew. You helped her. You even let her use your phone to verify the fraud. Aunt Sarah, did you know Mom took a second mortgage on her own house to pay for Elena's designer furniture? If the bank forecloses on the Maple Drive house, which they will because the accounts are frozen, the debt will fall back on Mom. She's going to lose this house too." The room went cold. Aunt Sarah looked at my mother, then at Elena. The perfect image was cracking. "Elena?" Aunt Sarah asked, her voice losing its edge. "Is that true? About the second mortgage?" Elena didn't answer. She just started to cry. Real tears of rage this time, not the fake ones from before. "I just wanted a life. I just wanted to be like everyone else. Claire has everything. She has the career, the freedom. Why shouldn't I have a nice house?" "Because you didn't pay for it," I said. "I did. With my future." I walked to the door, but before I left, I looked back at my mother. "The bank is going to call you tomorrow. They're going to ask for a statement. You have 2 choices. You can tell them the truth, or you can go down with her. But I'm done being the paper daughter. From now on, I'm the one holding the pen." As I drove away, I felt a weight lifting, but I knew the hardest part was coming. I hadn't just exposed a theft. I had destroyed the hierarchy of my family. I was no longer the stable one they could rely on. I was the one who had brought the fire to their doorstep. But as I looked at the alerts on my phone, I saw a new notification. It wasn't a debt collector. It was a message from a private investigator I had hired that morning with the last of my savings. Found something. Elena isn't just using your name. She's been using someone else's too. You aren't the first sister she's done this to. My heart stopped. Elena didn't have another sister, but my father had been married once before, a long time ago. A half-sister I had only heard about in whispers. The audit was no longer just about me. It was about a pattern of destruction that went back decades. The private investigator's message felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't realized was there. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had grown up believing I was the difficult one, solely because I didn't fit into the high-gloss, high-drama mold my mother and Elena had cast. But if there was someone else, someone before me, then the narrative changed. I wasn't the outlier. I was just the next victim in line. The investigator had provided a name, Sarah Jane Miller. She was my father's daughter from a brief marriage in his early 20s, long before he met my mother. In my house, she was a ghost. A name mentioned once in a hushed argument and then buried under the weight of new beginnings. I found her living in a quiet suburb 3 hours north. I didn't call. I didn't want to give her a chance to hang up. I just drove. Sarah Jane lived in a modest, well-kept ranch house. When she opened the door, she looked at me with a startling, familiar set of eyes. My father's eyes. But when I introduced myself, her expression didn't soften into sisterly warmth. It hardened into a wall of granite. "I don't have a sister," she said, her hand already moving to close the door. "I'm Claire," I said quickly, blocking the frame with my foot. "I'm the second paper daughter. Elena just bought a $400,000 house in my name. My credit score is a 400. I think she did the same thing to you." The door stopped moving. Sarah Jane stared at me for a long, agonizing minute before she stepped back and gestured for me to come in. The house inside was sparse, almost clinical. There were no family photos on the walls. "She didn't just buy a house in my name," Sarah Jane said, sitting at a small kitchen table. "She stole my identity to get through nursing school. She ran up $50,000 in student loans under my social security number while I was working 2 jobs to put myself through community college. By the time I found out, the debt was in collections and my mother, our father's first wife, had passed away. I had no one to help me fight it." "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. "I tried," she said with a bitter laugh, "but our father called me. He begged me. He said Elena was troubled and that Mom, your mother, was fragile. He promised they would pay it back if I didn't file the report." I was 22 and alone. I believed him. They paid for 6 months, then they stopped. They changed their numbers. They moved. I spent 10 years paying off the education of a woman who never even finished the degree. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the blueprint. My mother hadn't just enabled Elena, she had coached her. They had refined the art of the family bailout until it was a lethal weapon. "I'm not letting them go this time," I said. "I've already frozen the bank accounts. I've flagged the mortgage, but I need more. I need to show a pattern of criminal intent so the bank doesn't just call it a family dispute. If you give me your records, your old police statements, and the emails from our father, I can make sure she never does this again." Sarah Jane looked at me, and for the first time I saw the sisterhood in her eyes. Not the fake, suffocating version Elena offered, but a shared trauma. "If I give you this, you're going to blow up your family, Claire. Your mother will never speak to you again. Elena will go to prison. Are you ready for that?" "My mother already chose her side," I said. "She chose the thief over the daughter who worked for her living. I'm not blowing up a family. I'm clearing the debris." I left Sarah Jane's house with a flash drive full of 10-year-old ghosts. As I drove back toward my motel, I realized I had the leverage. Elena wasn't just a sister who had made a mistake. She was a serial identity thief. And my mother wasn't a victim of her daughter's whims. She was an accomplice who had helped her escape justice once before. When I got back to the motel, there was a black car idling in the parking lot. My mother was leaning against the hood, looking small and fragile in the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot. She looked like the fragile woman my father had protected all those years ago. "Claire," she said, her voice cracking, "please, I've been waiting for 3 hours. We need to talk, not as lawyers or bankers, but as mother and daughter." "I'm not sure which daughter you're talking to, Mom," I said, walking past her toward my room. "The real one? Or the one you and Elena invented on a mortgage application?" She followed me inside, her eyes darting to the social audit papers pinned to the walls. She looked horrified. "You've gone too far. You're obsessed. Elena is in the hospital, Claire. She had a panic attack so severe they had to sedate her. She's losing her mind because of what you're doing. She's losing her lifestyle, Mom. There's a difference." "I have a proposal," my mother said, ignoring my sarcasm. "I'll sell my house, the one you grew up in. I'll use the equity to pay off the arrears on the Maple Drive house. We'll put the Maple Drive house in my name, and we'll take yours off. You'll be free. Your credit will be cleared over time. All you have to do is sign a document saying the initial application was an authorized error. No police, no court, just a family fix." It was the same offer they had given Sarah Jane. A family fix that relied on my silence and my mother's total self-destruction. "And where will you live, Mom?" I asked. "When you sell your house to pay for Elena's colonial, you'll you'll be homeless. You'll have to live with her. And we both know Elena. Once she has her house and her car back, she'll treat you like a servant. You're trading your life to keep her lie alive. It's what a mother does, she cried. She's my child. I'm your child too, I screamed, the sound echoing in the tiny room. Where was this devotion for me? Why didn't you care about my future when you were forging my name? Why didn't you care about Sarah Jane when you helped Elena steal her nursing school funds? My mother froze. The mention of Sarah Jane's name hit her like a physical strike. She sat down on the bed, her face losing all its color. You found her. I found the truth, Mom. And your proposal is a crime. You're asking me to sign a false statement to a federal bank. That's called conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm not doing it. Then what do you want? She whispered. I want the truth, I said. I want Elena to move out of that house tonight. I want the car returned to the dealership. And I want you to sign a confession stating exactly what you did so the bank can't sue me for the balance. If you do that, I'll keep the police out of it. If you don't, I hand this flash drive to the district attorney tomorrow morning. My mother looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see the stable, quiet Claire. She saw a woman who had finally calculated the cost of being good. You're a monster, she whispered. No, Mom, I said, opening the door for her. I'm just the only Vance who's actually paying the bills. Get out. She left, her shoulders slumped, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Elena wouldn't go quietly. She had spent a lifetime being the perfect daughter, and she was about to show me just how far she would go to keep that mask from slipping. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Elena didn't pack her bags as I had demanded. Instead, she went live. She took to the very social media accounts she had built using my name and started a public campaign of sorrow. She didn't name me directly at first, speaking instead of a family tragedy and unforeseen financial betrayal that was threatening to put her children on the street. She was preempting the truth with a layer of performance, painting herself as the besieged mother fighting a cold-hearted relative. The community, which knew her as the charitable Claire Vance, rallied. People were offering to start a crowdfunding page. Local business owners she had networked with were calling my burner phone, leaving messages of outrage, thinking they were talking to a debt collector who was harassing a saint. It was a hall of mirrors. She was using my reputation to protect herself from me. On Wednesday morning, the bank's voluntary surrender process hit a wall. Mr. Miller called me, his voice strained. Ms. Vance, we sent the recovery team for the vehicle and an appraiser for the property. Your sister refused entry. She told the local police that you are an estranged sibling with a history of mental instability and that the identity theft claim is a fabricated part of a harassment campaign. Because the mortgage is technically in Claire Vance's name and she is the occupant, the police said it's a civil matter. They won't remove her without an eviction order. Elena was digging in. She was betting that the slow wheels of the legal system would give her enough time to find a new mark or to guilt me into a settlement. She thought that because I was the stable one, I wouldn't want a public scandal. She was wrong. I was no longer interested in being quiet. I drove to the Maple Drive house. I didn't go alone. I had contacted the local news station's On Your Side investigative reporter, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who specialized in consumer fraud. I had given her the flash drive from Sarah Jane Miller. I had given her the forged documents. I told her that if she wanted the story of the decade, the serial identity thief of suburbia, she needed to be at the Brick Colonial at 2 p.m. When I arrived, the silver SUV was pulled halfway onto the lawn, as if Elena had been prepared to flee. I walked up to the front door and found it bolted from the inside. Elena's voice came through the wood, high and hysterical. Go away, Claire, you're sick. I'm calling the police. The police are already on their way, Elena, I said, loud enough for the microphone Sarah Jenkins was holding behind me to pick up. And so is the bank's legal team. You can't hide behind my name anymore. I've already filed the affidavit with the Secretary of State. You aren't Claire today. You're just a squatter. My mother's car pulled into the driveway, screeching to a halt. She climbed out, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. When she saw the camera crew, she let out a sound of pure horror. Claire, what are you doing? This is family. You're putting us on the news? You put us on the news the day you helped her forge a federal document, Mom, I said. This isn't a private family matter. It's a series of crimes that started 15 years ago with Sarah Jane and ends today. The front door swung open. Elena stepped out, but she didn't look like the polished socialite anymore. Her hair was unwashed. Her eyes were wild, and she was clutching a stack of papers. The mortgage documents. You want the house, Claire? She screamed, throwing the papers into the wind. Take it. Take the debt. Take the bills. You were always so jealous of my life. Well, now it's yours. I hope you enjoy paying for a house that I've stripped bare. As the papers fluttered across the manicured lawn, the On Your Side reporter stepped forward. Ms. Vance, we have records indicating that this isn't the first time you've utilized a sibling's identity for financial gain. We've spoken to Sarah Jane Miller. Do you have a comment on the $50,000 in student loans you took out in her name? Elena's face went from rage to absolute paralyzing fear. She looked at the camera lens, then at me. The realization that her past had finally caught up to her, that the ghost sister was real, broke her. She didn't have a witty comeback. She didn't have a fake sob. She simply turned and ran back into the house, slamming the door. My mother stood on the driveway, surrounded by the debris of Elena's life. She looked at the camera, then at me, her eyes filled with a cold, piercing hatred. I hope you're happy, Claire. You've destroyed her. You've destroyed everything I worked for. No, Mom, I said, stepping closer to her. I saved you. If I hadn't done this, she would have taken your house too. She would have bled you dry until you you were sitting on a curb with nothing but a thank you note from a daughter who doesn't love you. The police arrived 10 minutes later. Because of the on-your-side presence and the formal identity theft affidavits I had filed, the civil matter excuse vanished. The officers saw the evidence of the forgery on the spot. They didn't arrest Elena yet. That would take a few more days of processing, but they escorted her and her children out of the house. I watched from the sidewalk as my sister was led to my mother's car, carrying her belongings in trash bags. The designer coat was stained, and the silk robe was gone. She looked small. She looked like exactly what she was, a thief who had run out of pockets to pick. As my mother drove her away, the bank's appraiser finally stepped onto the porch. He looked at me, then at the house. "It's going to be a long road to clear the title, Ms. Vance. And the interior, it sounds like she wasn't lying about stripping it." "I don't care about the house," I said, looking at my reflection in the window. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't see a stable, boring shadow. I saw myself. I just want my name back. The reporter thanked me and headed to her van. The show would air at 6 p.m. The Paper Daughter was about to become the lead story. I sat on the front steps of the house I owned but never wanted. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah Jane Miller. I saw the news teaser. "Thank you, Claire, for both of us." I leaned my head back against the cold brick. The collapse was complete. There were no more lies to hide behind, no more perfect sisters to satisfy. But as I sat there, I realized that while the debt was gone, the family I thought I had was gone with it. I was truly alone, and for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a clean slate. The aftermath of the On Your Side broadcast was like the silence after a massive explosion. The town, which had once treated Elena like a local luminary, turned cold overnight. The crowdfunding pages were taken down, replaced by vitriolic comments from people who felt used. The perfect life Elena had constructed was revealed to be a hollow shell, and the weight of that truth finally brought the structure down. I spent the next 3 months living in a state of administrative warfare. Clearing an identity theft of this magnitude isn't a single event. It's 1,000 small, exhausting battles. I had to sit in cramped government offices, providing fingerprints to prove I wasn't the one who signed the car loan. I had to mail hundreds of notarized copies of the police report to every credit card company and utility provider. My kitchen table in my Seattle studio, to which I had retreated like a wounded animal, was buried under a mountain of paperwork. But with every account closed letter and every fraudulent entry removed notification, I felt a piece of my soul returning. My credit score didn't jump back to 790 overnight. It sat in the mid-600s, scarred by the settled marks and the sheer volume of inquiries. But it was mine. It was a reflection of my actual life, not a fantasy world built by a thief. The legal consequences for Elena were swift, but in many ways, anticlimactic. Because she had no prior criminal record, thanks to the silence of Sarah Jane and my father years ago, the district attorney offered her a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony identity theft and 1 count of mortgage fraud. She received 5 years of probation, a massive fine she will likely never be able to pay, and a permanent record that ensures she will never hold a job in sales or finance again. She had to move into my mother's basement, the very place she had fought so hard to escape. My mother's house survived, but barely. She had to sell most of her jewelry and take a part-time job at a local library to pay off the second mortgage she had taken out for Elena. The golden child was now a permanent dependent, and the fragile mother was now the primary breadwinner for a family of 4 in a 2-bedroom house. The karma was quiet, domestic, and utterly relentless. The last time I spoke to my mother was 6 months after the broadcast. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice sounding thin and brittle. "The bank sent a final notice today, Claire," she said, her tone devoid of the old fire. "The Maple Drive house is being sold at auction next week. Elena, she's taking it hard. She says you should be the one to buy it, since it was in your name anyway. She says it would be justice if the house stayed in the family." I looked at the walls of my studio apartment. They were bare, save for a single framed photo of the ocean I'd taken on a trip I'd finally been able to afford. "I don't want the house, Mom. I never did. And Elena doesn't get to define what justice looks like for me anymore." "You're still so cold," she whispered. "We're your family. We're all we have." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "You had me. You had a daughter who worked hard, who respected you, and who was willing to help you. You chose to trade that daughter for a paper version that looked better in photos. You didn't just lose my credit, you lost me. Please don't call again." I hung up, and for the first time, I didn't feel the crushing weight of family duty. I didn't feel the need to fix a problem I hadn't created. I felt nothing but a cool, refreshing indifference. A year after the discovery, I finally walked into a bank in Seattle to apply for a small business loan. I wanted to open my own boutique marketing agency. I sat across from a loan officer, my hands steady. When he pulled up my file, I didn't flinch. "I see there was some significant fraud activity on your account about 18 months ago," he said, looking over his glasses. "Yes," I said. "It's all been resolved. I have the final clearance letters from the FTC and the state's attorney." He studied the papers, then looked at me. "It's a lot to go through, Ms. Vance. Most people would have just filed for bankruptcy and started over." "I couldn't do that," I told him. "My name is the only thing I really own. I wasn't going to let anyone else write the final chapter of my story." He smiled and stamped the application. "Approved. Welcome to your new business, Claire." As I walked out of the bank and into the bright Seattle sunshine, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Sarah Jane. She had sent me a photo of herself standing in front of a new car, a modest, reliable hybrid. She had finally cleared the last of her own ghost debts and was starting a degree in social work. The caption read, "The ghosts are gone. Hope you're breathing easy today." I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a sweetness I hadn't known was possible. I looked at the bustling city around me. I was Claire Vance. I wasn't a stable shadow, a minimalist in a box, or a paper daughter. I was a woman who had survived the ultimate betrayal and come out the other side with her integrity intact. I headed toward a small cafe to celebrate. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for a bill I didn't owe. I wasn't checking my credit score every hour like a person waiting for a heart transplant. I was just living. The audit was over. The books were balanced. And for the first time, the Claire Vance that the world saw was exactly the same as the one who looked back at me from the mirror. Even now, I still think about how easily things can look normal from the outside. This experience taught me to pay attention to the details I once ignored. Maybe someone listening right now needs this reminder too.